Have you ever noticed how, every day, people risk everything in search of a chance on American soil? There are thousands of them crossing borders and facing dangers, driven by the hope of a better life. After all, we grow up with that classic image of the United States, don't we? Gleaming buildings, cars we only see in movies, and the promise of a bright future for all those who make the effort. But is that the truth for those who live there? Today, Bello Mundo is going to take you on a tour you never expected to take and show you that the famous American dream has become nothing more than an endless struggle for basic things like a plate of food and a little dignity. Number 1. Economy. The United States boasts a GDP that exceeds an impressive $25 trillion, leading the global rankings in production and consumption. Sounds like a dream country, doesn't it? But despite these great figures, social inequality is an eye-catching problem. While some sail around in luxury yachts and live in mansions that look like castles, millions of families struggle to survive, living paycheck to paycheck and not knowing if they will have food on the table next month. Recent figures show that the poverty rate in the United States is around 11%. In other words, more than 37 million Americans live in conditions of extreme hardship. With inflation skyrocketing and the cost of living rising unabated, especially in areas such as health, housing, and education, the situation is only getting worse. The result? Millions of Americans find themselves in a daily battle to make ends meet, and that's when they manage to cover their basic needs. And if we're talking about struggles, the next item on our list is one that steals the sleep of many Americans: lack of employment. Number 2. Unemployment in the United States. If we could go back to the 1950s, we would see the golden age of the American economy, a time when cities were booming, baby boomers were growing in number, and believed that anything was possible. With stable, well-paid jobs, these families boosted the economy, increasing demand for homes, products, and services. It was the height of the American dream, where opportunities sprang up around every corner, and the United States was the destination for those seeking a better future. 7 decades later, the picture is very different. The headlines may say that unemployment in the country is at historically low levels, with an average rate of less than 4% in 2013, but the reality is much more complicated. The job market is cooling, and the growth in vacancies is slowing down at a worrying rate. After the brief optimism of the post-pandemic recovery, the truth has come out. Hiring figures have fallen far short of expectations, frustrating those who had hoped for a heated market. Entire sectors such as technology and finance have faced waves of layoffs. In other words, not all areas are thriving. Not to mention that the increase in interest rates by the Federal Reserve to control inflation has made it even more difficult to create new jobs, affecting purchasing power and domestic consumption. As a result, many Americans need 2 or 3 jobs to cover their basic bills. The American dream. For many, it's become a nightmare that's hard to wake up from. But do you know what gets hit hardest when interest rates rise and inflation explodes? Rents. They go through the roof. Number 3. Rising rents. In the United States, the price of living is becoming a real headache for many people. Even though the market has cooled down slightly after the craziness of 2021 and 2022, years in which rent prices skyrocketed due to the pandemic, the reality for those paying rent is still cruel. In 2022, a record 23 million families spent more than 30% of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. And in 2024, things haven't changed all that much. with rent prices still soaring and money getting tighter for many Americans. To give you an idea, the average rent in the United States has passed $2,000 a month, with some metropolitan areas easily surpassing that figure. It doesn't sound like much when you compare it to the GDP per capita of around $75,000 a year, but if you divide that figure by 12, which is the number of months in the year, you get $6,000 a month. Now, take out $2,000 for rent, and that's 32% of your salary just to have a place to live. It's no wonder that renting a place is becoming a luxury that many can't afford. Today, millions of Americans face a bitter choice: pay the rent or pay for other basic needs, such as food and health care. Which brings us to a new reality: alternative housing. Number 4. People living in cars or trailers. With rents soaring and the cost of living stifling, many Americans are resorting to solutions that, until recently, were unthinkable. So-called vehicle residency, or living in your own car, is becoming increasingly common. It is estimated that around 40% of homeless people in urban areas on the coast of the United States make their vehicles their home. Many families, after losing their homes, have turned their cars into shelters. Large chain parking lots, such as Walmart's, have become night shelters since they are free and offer a minimum of security. There are also safe parking lots, places where you can park overnight with a little more security and access to toilets. Another alternative is trailers. Trailer parks, which were once seen as temporary solutions, are now the only way out for thousands of people who can no longer afford the absurd rental costs. These parks offer a little more stability, but life there is still full of uncertainties and difficulties. But what about those who have neither a car nor a trailer? The harsh reality is facing the streets. Number 5. Homeless people and the concentration of homeless people. When it comes to homeless people in the United States, the reality is even harsher than you might think. More than 40% of these people live without access to shelters, facing the extreme conditions of the streets on a daily basis without any kind of security. This means that almost half are at the mercy of the weather, violence, and disease every day. The largest concentrations of homeless people are in large urban centers where homeless encampments have sprung up, occupying sidewalks, parks, and public spaces, becoming part of everyday life in the city. And believe me, the situation in these places is chilling. In cities like Los Angeles and New York, the scene often looks like a real apocalypse. The situation is becoming increasingly dangerous and chaotic, bringing with it new challenges and risks that affect not only the homeless, but also the surrounding communities. And we'll talk about that later, because now we need to discuss another brutal reality: hunger. Number 6. Food. When we think of hunger, the last image that comes to mind is of Americans suffering from it. But the truth is different. For those living on the streets, in trailers, or even in cars, getting food and access to medical care becomes a real battle. And when we say battle, we're not exaggerating. Many depend on food banks, organizations that distribute food to those who can't afford it. And it's in these places that long queues form, which have become part of the daily lives of thousands of people, all struggling to guarantee at least one meal and not sleep on an empty stomach. There are also soup kitchens, community kitchens that offer hot meals in churches or community centers. Help that, although valuable, is limited and never enough for everyone who needs it. Number 7. Access to medical care. And if getting a meal is hard enough, imagine accessing medical care. Without a fixed address or health insurance, homeless people don't have many options. The only alternative is usually the emergency room, which, because it's always full, only offers the bare minimum. No follow-up, no ongoing treatment. Non-profit organizations, mobile clinics, and some state initiatives try to fill the gap, but it's like trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. Sound shocking? Yes, this is the reality for many people in the land of opportunity. And if all that hasn't shocked you yet, we're now going to talk about a scenario that's almost impossible to imagine. Number 8. Drug users and America's cracklins. After all this helplessness and the daily struggle to survive, it's not hard to understand why so many people end up looking for an escape from this suffocating reality. And unfortunately, one such escape is drug use. Just like São Paulo's famous Cracolândia, which has made headlines around the world, the United States has its own Cracolândias. And, believe it or not, the situation can be even more desperate there. One of the most disturbing examples of this is the Skid Row neighborhood in Los Angeles. To be honest, calling Skid Row a neighborhood is almost an understatement. It's more like an exclusion zone in the heart of Los Angeles, known for housing one of the largest concentrations of homeless people in the United States. Estimates vary between 5,000 and 8,000 people living there. There are around 50 blocks dominated by chaos, extreme poverty, and drug addiction. What happens there is frightening. The region is marked by high crime rates and an epidemic of overdoses, with ambulances constantly circulating to attend to emergencies linked to drug use. The streets are filled with tents and makeshift shelters, turning this place into a symbol of the failure of public policies to deal with poverty and addiction. And the tragedy doesn't stop in Los Angeles. Other major American cities are following suit. Number 9. Poverty in New York. New York, the Big Apple, is yet another city deeply devastated by drugs and poverty. Although it appears to be the epicenter of prosperity, behind the bright lights of Times Square and the skyscrapers of Manhattan lies a grim reality that few know about. Believe it or not, around 1.5 million New Yorkers live in poverty. That's 18% of the population struggling to make ends meet. And the situation is even more critical in areas such as the Bronx, Upper Manhattan, and Central Brooklyn, regions historically marked by high social vulnerability and low-income communities. In these neighborhoods, lack of access to health services, unemployment, and precarious living conditions combine to create an environment conducive to increased drug use and, tragically, overdose deaths. In 2023, the impact of this was devastating. In the second quarter alone, New York recorded 759 overdose deaths, many of them linked to fentanyl, a devastating drug that spreads like a virus out of control. Fentanyl is an extremely potent synthetic opioid, around 50 times stronger than heroin, and its low cost makes it a lucrative option for drug dealers and a death trap for the poorest users. But do you think it's the only one? Of course not. Detroit is going from bad to worse, too. Number 10. Detroit's bankruptcy and abandonment. The city that was once the automobile capital of the United States is far from being the powerhouse it once was. With the collapse of the automobile industry, thousands of jobs have disappeared, plunging the region into a spiral of decay. Today, around 20% of the properties are completely vacant, serving as a stage for increased drug use and rampant crime. Areas like the notorious 8 Mile Road have become veritable symbols of poverty and drug trafficking, transforming the divide between the city and the metropolitan region into a frontier of despair. And if you think that's an exaggeration, just look at Brightmoor, where the situation has gotten completely out of hand. The crime rate has exploded, and the place has become an epicenter of violence and substance abuse. Just to give you an idea, the rate of violent crime in the city is 448% higher than the national average. Believe me, the chances of a resident being the victim of a crime, there are 1 in 16, making it one of the most dangerous places in the United States. Number 11. Where is the government that doesn't see? After all this, you're probably wondering, what is the government doing to resolve this situation? The answer, unfortunately, is not very encouraging. There are some social programs such as SNAP for food stamps and Medicaid for healthcare, which try to offer some relief. But let's face it, these programs can't keep up with demand. Every day, more and more people get in line for help, and the already scarce resources simply aren't enough for everyone. There are also housing programs, such as the Housing Choice Voucher, which subsidize rents. But the reality is harsh. The waiting list is too long, and many end up giving up halfway through. Emergency shelters, which should be a temporary solution, are overcrowded and often offer anything but safety. The government even talks about solutions such as transitional housing and housing first programs. But the truth is that these initiatives are isolated and have no real impact on the problem. What we see in practice is a system that tries to plug a hole much bigger than it can cover. Until there is massive investment in affordable housing, comprehensive social services, and truly inclusive policies, the picture will not change. The homeless crisis, drug addiction, crime, and poverty will continue to grow, and the so-called land of opportunity will continue to be, for many, just a land of hopelessness. And so we come to the end of our journey through the harsh realities hidden behind the American dream. And you, what did you think of these stories? Did you already know any of them, or were you surprised by what you saw? Leave your opinion in the comments. We want to know what impressed you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this. Share this video with your friends so that they too can discover these hidden realities and other surprising curiosities in our Bello Mundo, which can often be not so bello. To those of you who have watched us so far, thank you very much, and see you next time.